offers a pretest option. Those pretests are available at a cost, currently $2 per test per student. Um, Whereas the post tests that your students take in either in the early winter or at the end of the school year, those are available at no cost. So that pre-testing window closes today, and then the Monday after next, uh, the post tests and the practice tests and the field tests will open up for delivery. And a lot of times, this early part of the year is when you're doing maybe some retesting of students that were in those classes last year and they're looking to improve their scores a little bit. So it's never too early to do whatever remediation is necessary to get those students prepared to retake tests. So as I said, that all opens on the 14th, and then that remains open throughout the end of the year, with one exception. Uh, but I do want to cover there's also a winter pre-testing window for second semester courses. It's basically open the entirety of January. So the next important date after that is when field testing closes. And that is earlier than for most post tests. It's on April 18th, 2025. So this year, field testing is for the agriculture and environmental science career field. So if you're an agriculture teacher or you have an ag program at your school, just be advised, you got to get that testing done a little bit earlier than maybe you usually would. Also, just know those tests are a bit longer. Um, so make sure your students have that time. To the extent possible, you want to make sure you have at least 90 minutes to sort of complete those tests. Uh, so just, again, be aware if you're an ag teacher, if you have some ag programs that your students may need that extra time. And for those of you at the career centers, we certainly ask you to help us make sure that your associate schools and other schools in your CTPD are aware of field testing for ag. There's a lot of ag programs out there that we don't interact with a huge amount because they just get in the flow and doing the same thing year after year. And of course, that's once the flow is set, that's when we have to change things. So again, when you're working with your associate schools, please make sure that they know that their ag programs are in field testing this year, and that does mean early testing and longer tests. There are a few other sort of dates. I'm going to get to those in a second here. The first one is what's called the target for field test finalization. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second, but the basic idea there is during field testing in ag or whatever career field we're right in that particular year, your students are getting sort of provisional scores. And once field testing closes, we get hard at work and sort of figuring out which 40 items best assess student knowledge. And then we rescore all of those tests based on just those 40 items. And that's just the fairest way to do things. And so we aim to have that done by the 5th of May so that if you have students who need to retake that field test in order to improve their scores, like as seniors who are graduating, and they need to improve that score to graduate, you'll have some time to get that done. And obviously for schools, that last day of school, particularly for seniors, will vary pretty widely. So we try to get that done as quickly as possible. Lastly, the last date is that end of year report release, which is typically in mid-June. And that's basically when we sort of have compiled all of the scoring data for the entire year. We release that to your ITCs. Yeah, should be 2025. Thank you, Sean. Those dates are 2025. I apologize for that. We'll switch back to the other slide then, and we'll look at it there. See, it's better there, right? Um, thanks. So be prepared for additional misspellings along the way. Fair warning. Um, field test finalization is on the 5th, and then, like I said, at the end of or in the middle of June, we'll do that end of year reporting. So basically, we send that report file to your ITC. Your ITC will either load that into your student information system or send the file to your district, and your district will load that into their student information system, which will then do the reporting to AMIS. And then some sort of magic happens and everything works. I'll skip right past that. While we're sort of talking about these tests, I will mention teacher review workshops. Have any of you here ever participated in a teacher review workshop? So it's an opportunity for teachers and some administrators, if necessary, to review the actual tests that your students will see. Now, we like to say that the course outlines and the course blueprints, we'll get to in a second, are the most important things. But sometimes it is helpful to see the actual tests to see how we ask questions specifically for your courses. So we hold monthly sessions to do that here in this very room. And you can see those dates there. Again, fair warning, there's a cost associated with that. I wonder if I can. Um, so fair warning, there's a cost associated with that of $60. But you can basically, for a 3-hour session, review 3 hours? A 3-hour session, you can review as many courses as you wish. But just know that once you review a course, you won't be able to review it again until it gets rewritten. Um, So, just like don't review like maybe an entire pathway, because then if your program changes, you won't be able to come back and review those courses that you're changing to. Um, but those dates are available. I think the one for the 16th is almost full or very nearly full. The one on Veterans Day is filling up, but the rest of them, there's plenty of space available. Um, However, we do also host teacher review sessions at districts. There's a lot of rules associated with when we can do that and how the travel works and all that kind of stuff. But if that is an interest for your school, or maybe a group of schools in your area that want to get together and sort of host a workshop for themselves, just send us an email, support@webexam.org, and we'll do what we can to help you out. All right. Any questions from the people in the room? Wonderful. And if you have questions in chat, feel free to drop them in the chat. There are several people monitoring the chat.
One question is, can pretest be paused and restarted the next day if class periods are not long enough?
Yeah, so the question is, can pretests be paused? And really, we can talk about any test in this context. To whatever extent possible, tests should be completed in one session. And in most cases, that's a hard rule. Obviously, fire alarms, a student illness, those kinds of issues can affect things. And in those situations, yes, a test can be paused and then started again at another time. And what you'll sort of see happen in that situation, say there's some sort of emergency. Let's just say there's a fire drill that comes along, and your students need to evacuate. Obviously we don't want them, trying to finish the test, But if they can before they leave, it's best if they can sort of close that browser window to preserve test security. Um, and that also sort of sends a signal to us to pause that test where they are. And then if they can get back fairly quickly, they'll just be able to sign right back in and restart the test. Otherwise, you may need to go through a activation process again. And what you'll notice when you do that is that there's an option when choosing a test type to choose saved test. I think Brock will cover this in his part of the presentation, but there's a saved test option, and then all your students that have in progress tests will be listed there. But in general, if there's not an illness or an emergency, students should be completing those tests in one session. One exception to that is if you have a student who has unlimited time and is taking a field test. Because those are so much longer, if a situation arises where that student needs to, go to the restroom or go to another class or do whatever it is, those tests uh, can be paused and then can be restarted by policy.
An additional question was, if you have a year-long course, but students were not there in the beginning to pretest, can they pretest in the second semester window?
They certainly can. We don't recommend that because by then they will have seen half of the content, presumably, and that's not necessarily a good measure of what their knowledge was coming in. So I would tend to say you probably shouldn't pre-test a student halfway through the year, but that is something you can do if you want to. But again, I would not encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I would just add that I talked to some teachers and they'll assume the pretest is more of a practice type test and it's designed to measure what the students know before instruction. So if you're testing them later in the instruction, they're going to score higher. And when we calculate the effectiveness of your teaching later in the year, the point gain that they would gain would be smaller. But mostly you can use the pretest to look at where the students did well or not. But it's not really a practice test. It's designed to help you determine where you might want to focus your instruction.
All right, so let's talk about some changes to WebXam this year. I do want to specifically focus on retake policies real quickly because they change a little bit every year. I don't think they've changed this year, but it's still always worth going over. So, so I'm going to do this off the top of my head, and we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun, trust me. So first off, assessment recommendation. The Ohio Department of Education Workforce recommends that every student enrolled in a course that has a web exam assessment, that they take that web exam assessment. And I think eventually that will be a must, but currently it is still a strongly recommends and is certainly necessary for report cards and participation scores and all that kind of stuff. Students who take a test can retake that in the following year and every year after during which they're still enrolled in school. But there's also a same year retake option. And so that students can take a test 30 days after they took the initial test. And that's one retake per year. And that's every student that's enrolled that has taken the test, unless it's a field test. For field tests, as we were sort of discussing earlier, once those field tests get finalized, then graduating students can retake those tests if necessary for graduation or for CTAG credit. So if a student took the field test, the rescoring got done, they weren't in the proficient range, so they want to retake that to try to make sure they get that college credit or get the graduation that they need, Those students that are seniors or graduating students can retake the test then. For your non-seniors, for your non-graduating students, they can then retake the test the next year. So those are sort of the retake options that are available. And all of that is on that Ohio Department of Education website for Career Technical Education Assessment System. So, and again, just a reminder for this is really mainly for administrators out there that starting last year, students that are students and teachers need to be added to programs in WebXam in order for the uploads to work, in order for them to test, and all that is important. So I know a lot of administrators are focused on getting those uploads done and getting students into their programs and all that kind of stuff. So just be aware, and we're going to do some walkthroughs of some of those processes here in a little bit. So the big new thing in WebXam this year is question translations. So starting this year, we're offering machine translations from the English version of the test into Spanish, if necessary. And then we'll sort of look at it after this year and see if there's additional languages that we want to add. But this year, it's Spanish only. That is available to all students. No accommodation is necessary. They'll be able to click on a gear icon and say, I want the Spanish translation. We'll sort of show how that looks to a student during the walkthrough process. But just know the student will see both the English and the Spanish version of each question and of each possible answer, so that they'll have both available to them. Because they're machine translations, we do want to make sure that they can have that English original version available if they need it. The next thing is baking and pastry arts. So those of you in districts with hospitality programs that include baking and pastry arts, as you know, a few years ago, a performance assessment was added to that subject code 330125, burned into my brain. So just be aware that there are some changes to the recipe based on teacher feedback, and to the checklist that assessors use for assessing student progress through the performance assessment. You can get new copies of those checklists and recipes from the Department of Education and Workforce website at their hospitality and tourism area, or from webexam.org/public/baking, where the checklist and recipe are also available. I think for the checklist, they removed one item from that checklist that was not necessary. I don't know. I think maybe there was a few amount changes to the recipe to make sure that schools weren't having to have too much stuff available. Basically, so they only had to prepare what was necessary for the recipe. And with that, I'm going to turn things over. Or is there questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions we should probably just address. So one individual is asking for clarification on how a student is determined as proficient on WebXam when they haven't sat for all the tests in their pathway. Their understanding has always been that to be a pathway, there needs to be a minimum of 4 courses. And then they believe that it was calculate the overall score once 3 tests are taken, but it seems the additional tests could alter their score.
And that is unchanged. That is exactly right. So no, students don't need to take every test in a pathway. They need to take every test in their program, I think is probably the sort of short answer there.
Yeah, to follow a little bit on, as the students are taking their courses, you want to test them once they've completed instruction. WebXam will start calculating a proficiency score after the second test. That score will change every additional test they take throughout their career. And then the goal is by the time they graduate for them to have completed their courses and their overall proficiency score to be proficient, which is what ODE is looking for as far as student progress.
Can I ask a clarifying question real quick?
Sure.
So can that can their proficiency status change then in regards to needing it for graduation, having a cumulative proficiency on 3 web exams? Once a student hits that status and then they take a fourth test.
Yeah, it can. And so it's important because I think the graduation language is a little bit unclear on that point. So it's a great question. But in terms of how this works, the student's pathway score that you see either in EMIS or in WebExam is the one that's used for graduation. It's not like once they've taken 3 tests, that's it. And then even if you take a fourth test, that won't affect graduation. It's not that. It's the pathway score. So a student has taken 4 tests in the pathway or 5 tests in the pathway. All 5 of those are part of the proficiency score for that pathway and for graduation. Exactly. Yeah. So
I
sorry.
think that's what she was asking, so I wanted
Yeah.
to clarify.
Yeah. So if a student is proficient after 3 and then they take a fourth test and then they're not proficient, that matters. So you'll either want to have a student retake whatever tests are necessary to improve that score, or if there's additional tests that or additional courses that they're enrolled in that pathway, you want to make sure they take those tests to try to get that score up.
This is something that I get a lot of calls at the end of the year asking questions about. We do recommend that school district administrators pay attention to the students progressing through their pathway. You can retest, as we talked about earlier, 30 days after the initial test. So if you can work with your teachers to have them strategize about when they'll wrap up instruction, and maybe 35 days before the end of the time that you're going to lose those students, plan to give them the initial test. And then you will have the opportunity, probably 5 days left before you lose them, to retest the students who maybe didn't pass. Additionally, since you can retest every year, if a student doesn't do well, you can make sure that the administrators notify the next year's teacher, ask them to work with the student on that material, and schedule a time to retest. School districts that really focus in on the students that didn't do well or didn't perform very well on an individual test can really raise those scores and have a higher passage rate at the end. But it does require kind of the school district being involved and watching it. Any individual teacher is usually going to be focused on the course that they're teaching and not the overall pathway.
I have a Chinese student with basically no English ability, and we have translation tools on his iPad. So I'm assuming the WebEx is like a secure browser they have to use. Would he have any ability of using any of his tools, or is he going to have no idea what the questions are asking?
I would certainly work with your school. School may have an intervention specialist or someone like that who can work with them. What you can do in that situation is make sure that student has an unlimited time accommodation, and then he'll work with an intervention specialist who can help them translate. This year we're offering Spanish. Next year we'll offer more languages, I'm sure. Students in that situation can still have a foreign language dictionary like with them while they're taking those tests. But again, a lot of times working with an intervention specialist is the sort of best way to make sure that student can get through that test.
At the top of WebExam, there's a documentation link. There's a section on accommodations. It does include a section about students who are learning English with the rules about allowing them to have a dictionary. We do not support using any third-party translation service because that service would not be secure when the data is sent to it, and they would have access to the test items. So that is not allowed.
Good morning, everyone. My question is this. So have you guys seen it all? I noticed when you run the pathway score report. You have that little window that comes up on the top. It gives you an alert that says, well, I'll read it because I ran it. It probably disappeared. It says all pathway scores in this report are preliminary and may change based on addition. And that kind of goes back to the question earlier on that. So based on EMAs. So when we're looking at the data, have you guys been seeing changes from ODEs, or are we seeing changes as that stuff's reported that they're changing the numbers? Because if I look in WebXam, I'm seeing a kid is good, but you get that little alert on top that we're still beholden to folks at ODEW, whatever they are, working some new magic numbers. So any commentary on that? You see any changes from data?
Yeah, I think the key point behind that is we just want to make sure you know that WebXam is providing those numbers, but the ultimate owner of that data, of those and that scoring, is EMIS. And so if there is ever a disagreement between us, and I don't know that I've really seen that, and we work with EMIS and ODEW, whatever, we work with them every day, it seems like, to try to keep everything in sync and everything working okay. But if there's some disagreement, they win that disagreement. That's what I'm trying to communicate there. Yeah, so we just want to make sure we're being clear about that with you. And so I would tend to say, if you have a student that's right on that borderline, it may be worth retesting that student to sort of give yourself a little bit of a buffer and give that student the best chance possible. All right. Thank you, sir.
All right. So I just wanted to, I'm Sean Hickey, the Deputy Director for the Assessment Program. And I just wanted to go over our web exam process and talk about field testing in a little more detail and answer any questions you might have about that. So this has animations, how exciting. Just a brief description of our item writing process. We're basically busy working on web exam assessments all year long. And so in the fall, one of our main tasks is to align existing items to revised standards. So for this year, that is the IT and arts and communications career fields. So we're currently in that process. During our item writing workshops, we look at the existing bank of test items and see which ones are still valid and worth salvaging so that we have sort of a backup bank of items. We are also recruiting for item writing workshops. So those two same career fields will be writing new test items throughout the year. And we're writing new items. And then we have both field tests and finalized test forms launching. And the field tests are for the career field or fields that we finished writing the previous year. So as Richard already mentioned, that includes agricultural and environmental systems. So those are in field test this year. And again, just to reiterate, that means that there is no pre-test available in web exam in that career field, and that the end of course tests are 95 items. And the window for taking those tests is just a couple weeks earlier. It's at the end of April. So again, if you have ag teachers, if you are an ag teacher, make sure that you're having those discussions now to plan sufficient time to take that field test form. And then the finalized forms, you may recall that business, finance, and marketing were in field testing last year. Those forms have been finalized, so they're back to normal with 40-item pre-tests and 40-item post-tests. So for those career fields, it'll feel just like it has for the past several years. It's back to normal. Throughout the winter, we continue the process of writing test items. We have those two career fields, IT and arts and communications, we'll be writing all year long. And so there are, I believe, a total of 70-ish courses across those two career fields that we'll be working on. In the spring, we continue that process, and then we also conduct what we call form finalization workshops, or we internally refer to those as our Plan B workshops, when we don't have enough field testers for some of those agricultural and environmental systems courses, the ones that have relatively low student populations, we conduct those Plan B workshops where we gather instructors to help us sort of navigate which items are likely to perform well with students and which aren't, so that we can use that data to create the final test forms. We also close the field testing window, as Richard already mentioned. That happens this coming year on April 18th for the ag tests. And we rescore those. That process takes a couple weeks, so that around the 5th of May, we should have the final scores for anybody who took those field test forms. And in the spring, we also start recruiting for our standard setting workshops for the career fields that we're writing test items to. So the standard setting process is an in-person workshop that we hold over the summer. And during that workshop, we basically look at all of the test items for each course to get an idea for how many of those test items you need to answer correctly in order to pass the test. So that's how we set the passing score or the performance standard. So that happens during the summer. We also have Richard and his team working on WebXam updates and user enhancements. And we send out our blueprint survey, which I'll be talking about in a little bit, to anybody who will be coming to item writing the following year. So this is our item writing process, and there are lots of ways that you can engage with the process depending on what career field you are in. For item writing workshops, we have a 3-step process. First, we create a blueprint, and that is based on data we get from teachers. We have a blueprint survey that goes out to anybody who teaches IT or arts and communications this year or ag last year, and they help us to understand which outcomes in the course outline are the most essential and which ones are the most important for each particular course, because of course, we don't know, we're not in the classroom teaching, so they're the ones helping us to understand where the emphasis should be. And we use that data to create the test blueprint, which is a document that tells us how many items to write for each outcome. Then we conduct small group item writing workshops. Those happen virtually via Zoom. And so we are currently in the process of those. We've already written about 200 brand new IT items and about 100 or so brand new arts and communication items. So that's just going to keep rolling on throughout the fall into the winter and spring. And then we conduct a large group review, which is one last sort of consensus edit process where everybody who was involved in the item writing will sit back down and actually look at those test items one last time to make sure that they're as good as they can be before they get in front of students next year for field testing. So that is the process for item writing. We have our calendar for item writing available on our news.webexam site. So if you are in the IT or arts and communication career fields and you would like to participate and just would like to know when we're writing which courses to understand if it fits into your schedule, you can go to that URL that you see on the screen, or you can just scan that QR code and that will take you to the calendar. And as I mentioned, we are recruiting. If you know right now that you're interested in being a subject matter expert, if you are an instructor or have expertise in those career fields, you can go to go.osu.edu/TTP 2025. TTP is our technical testing project. So this QR code or the URL underneath it will take you there. Why would you want to be a subject matter expert for item writing? Well, in addition to having to have input, getting to have input on what goes on the test, which is very important, you do actually get paid. We have stipends for the folks that participate in the virtual workshops. For the in-person workshops, we pay for travel and overnight expenses. So if you're coming to the standard setting workshops in the summer, we'll pay for your travel. You get lots of valuable information on how to write high quality multiple choice test items that you can use in your classroom. You can meet other teachers around the state that teach the same courses you do. It's a great networking opportunity. And finally, you can actually earn college credit or just use the time you're there for your own district's professional development hours. So again, it's a great opportunity. We've got lots of responses. Now that it's entirely virtual, we've gotten a lot of great feedback that it allows folks to participate without having to get a substitute teacher, without having to travel, still being able to spend time in the classroom and work with their families or other activities they have going on outside of school. So they all happen from 3 to 5 p.m. They're all weekdays. And like I said, the courses are in that calendar that was on the previous slide. So I would highly recommend it. I'm a little biased, but it is, I think, a really great opportunity. And it's something that we can't do on our own. We really need the expertise of folks that are in the classroom. So we really appreciate anyone's willingness to participate. So again, if you are in information technology or arts and communication, just scan the QR code or enter the URL that you see there on screen. And that is it for my part. So I will turn it back over to Richard. And I'll be back to talk about blueprints in a little bit.
A couple more follow-ups to questions. An individual asked about pausing the test again. So yes, if students are taking a test and need to pause it because of an emergency situation, they're sick, fire drill, or some other issue, you can instruct them to just close the browser window, which will stop the progress of the test. We record as their time the last time they submitted an item. So the last time they interacted with our web server will be the time that their test would be set back to. We do encourage you, though, this is only for emergency purposes. It's not really designed to break up tests. We don't want students to be able to go home, look up answers, and then get logged back in and take the tests again. There's another question. An individual says that they're from an ITC and have a couple of questions about one being an ag teacher in a district says that they weren't able to add a test to their students that they needed to take. So they ended up giving a different test. So that would be an issue. WebXam has changed the way that tests are assigned to students. In the past, you told us what pathway they were in, and then all of the tests in that pathway were added onto the student's account. Starting last year, we received information about the programs that individual school districts were approved for. So now there's a menu that's labeled programs in the left-hand sidebar. Administrators for a district can go in and assign only the test that that school district is planning on giving. That means when a teacher goes in and goes to activate a test, they will only see the tests that their district gave them access to. So it sounds like in this case, that teacher went in, tried to give a test, but their school district hadn't edited the lists of tests that they were able to see. They really should not have given a different test by just selecting something else. You only want to give the tests that you actually taught, which I do encourage teachers to know what courses they're teaching, the course ID and the name, as well as going out to ODE's website and downloading the course outline to know what ODE is having you cover in that course. Our tests are 100% designed to cover that material. I think that's good for now. I'll look for additional questions.
So can I ask another question?
Yep.
It's about that same question that he was just answering. So you said the school district has to assign or revamp the test that was assigned. This particular teacher teaches multiple classes in an ag program, so she has multiple tests out there for those students. Now I'm understanding now that it might have changed over the last year, but who is supposed to go in and assign that test? The answer that you had originally provided said they just need to contact you guys. So who's actually supposed to be assigning those tests?
So there's a couple of we don't always know exactly how your district is going to be structured, but districts generally will have a district testing coordinator, which is the initial administrator or multiple administrators that are assigned in the district that have complete control over managing their programs. They can go in and edit the program data in the sidebar. A teacher can go in and also view what programs they're assigned to by going to that same sidebar menu that says programs. It'll list every program that they're a member of, and then they can click a green plus icon to expand it and see what tests are available to that program. If they're finding that the tests aren't there that they should be teaching, talking to your district testing coordinator, or we have another level administration, which is just an administrator, which you could have maybe an administrator that's just over one particular program. Either one of them should be able to go in and modify the programs. If the teacher's having difficulty getting the answers or finding the person that they need to talk to, they can call us, and then we will help them find out who they would need to talk to. We generally are deferring to the district testing coordinators of the district to make those modifications. We can help teachers to make things be set up correctly, but it is the responsibility of the district to decide and determine what their programs are based off of. Does that answer your question?
So I have a follow-up. So this particular district does not have a district testing coordinator. They're a small district, and many building principals do the test coordination that is required in their building. So in how do we find out, or how does this district find out who is listed to be their administrator? Or, I mean, can a teacher be listed as a teacher and an administrator, or can they not be both?
So we do have some exceptions. So generally, a lot of districts are large enough that we encourage them to have a district administrator, or a couple of them is usually what I recommend, so that if one person leaves or retires or is on vacation, there's somebody else that can step in. We do have a lot of ag programs that are very, very small in rural districts where they might have a school and it's just one teacher teaching a couple of courses. In those situations, they can reach out to us and we help them either get the administrative rights that they need or help talk them through that process. So if you have a program that's so small that it's usually only one person, we'll often hear that the administration for the district doesn't really want to have another person involved. They just want that teacher to handle it all. And at that point, we generally will work with them explaining what the kind of administration process is, how they can get their students in. So yeah, in that particular case, you might want to just have them talk to us more frequently. Generally, we're trying to work with district testing coordinators or other administrators to try and get them up to speed, understand how WebXam operates. And then from that point on, a lot of the teachers' questions can be asked of them, and they have all the tools to handle those support requests directly faster inside the district. But whenever they hit something where they can't figure it out or there's some other type of issue, then we encourage them to reach out to us and we will help sort it out.
And then who would they reach out to? Is there a number or an email or person?
In WebXam, there's a support drop-down menu that lists the telephone number, the email address, as well as a field where you can directly submit a ticket to us. It goes into our ticket system. And then generally, I would say we get back to people most of the time in just a few hours, or call back if needed. If they call in with that number, it will go to our different staff. If one of our staff are online at their desk, it'll try and ring to them. If not, it'll go to a voicemail. You can leave a voicemail, and then we are checking that all the time and reaching back out to people. If you leave a message, a lot of people will call and hang up, but if you leave a message, we will get back to you as quickly as possible. Angie Stansel just put in a screenshot of that telephone number and email into the chat. So the email is, if you want to go send an email directly to us, it's support@webexam.org, and the phone number is 614-292-4988.
Thank you so much.
It's available directly in WebXam. Just look at the top.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so just in the interest of setting the stage here, I do want to talk about our WebXam About the Tests page to start. There's a lot of language we've been using here: proficiency scores, blueprints, course outlines. All that data is available on the WebXam About the Tests page. And then we'll head into other things. I'm going to do this live. I'm sure it will work perfectly. What could go wrong? Okay, I'm going to get logged in here, but this site is available with or without a login. Yep. You can always just do a Google search for WebXam about the tests if you need to, but if you want, you can find this little green box right here and give that guy a click, and you'll get WebXam about the tests, I hope. That's a great thing about doing it live. Wonderful. Here we go. So, WebXam about the tests. Again, what you're going to see for every course we offer is how many items are on that test this year, what the performance standard, which is the proficiency benchmark, is, what the advanced performance standard is, which is if you're sort of grading students, those ones who sort of hit the advanced level might be the ones you want to give A's to, whether or not that assessment is in field testing, and whether or not that assessment has a pre-test. And so you will see that. You can just go through this list and see this for every test in WebXam. You'll notice the first pathway or career field we're dealing with is agriculture. So all of these tests are in field testing. That's why there is no performance standard. That's why this is marked as field test. That's why there's not a pretest available. And that's why the number of items is not just 40 items. If you jump to a different career field, like if we look at the business and administrative services pathway, for example, we'll start to see, hey, medical terminology, which is cross-listed between health and business and a few other pathways as well. That the typical web exam is 40 items. And just to tell you what that means, and a student without any accommodation on a 40-item test has 40 minutes to complete that test. So it's 1 minute times the number of items. And that sometimes gets confused with what's called the activation window, which is 1 hour. But the students have 40 minutes in this case if there's no accommodations to complete the test. Accommodations may extend that time available as necessary. And we'll, again, that documentation that Brock mentioned goes into some detail on that. So I recommend checking that documentation. So for this medical terminology test, the performance standard is 60%, and the advanced performance standard is 95%. Now, what you'll notice is that for every test, that performance standard could be different. And that's not as typical of high school. It's probably more typical of certification type exams, which students will commonly face in career fields like construction or electrical trades, things like that. So just be advised that every test has a different performance standard. What we have tried to do whenever possible is to have this performance standard be basically evenly divisible by the number of items that the student is seeing. So there's no like, they're going to land all on 60%. It's not like something that they have to either get above or below. They can actually score 60%. So outside of agriculture this year, just know that there's performance standards and that this is an indication that that test is not in field testing this year, and so that there is a pretest. Yeah. So you can also just see all the field test items. If I go back to the top here, just field tests. And so you'll just see all the ag courses. I do want to just quickly note the very bottom down here. In manufacturing, there are 3 additional field tests this year for brand new courses. So if your school or career center has manufacturing programs, there are some new courses and assessments in Introduction to Semiconductors, Principles of Advanced Manufacturing, and Vacuum Systems. So your school or career center may not yet have any programs that are using those tests, but just be aware that those new tests are available and new courses are available if you are building new programs against that content. And those are being written because the field is telling us, the employers are telling us these are the people, these are some places where we need some people to do this kind of work. So I think it can be beneficial to your school to be offering programs that include these courses, and it can be beneficial to your students as well. And then at the bottom of this page, there are options to download an Excel file of the full About the Tests page. Now you'll notice two links, one for blueprints here, and this will show you the test blueprints for every test in transportation systems, for example. And then the standards page will take you out to the Ohio Department of Education page where you can download all the course outlines for all of these courses. Let's take a look at the blueprints for transportation. And so you will see for every course in transportation, we'll jump to it. Ground transportation, electrical, electronics. And we'll see all of the outcomes that are on that test, and we'll see how many items in our entire bank, what percentage of items in our entire bank are aligned to that outcome. And so what this tells you is the relative value that subject matter experts and teachers have placed on those outcomes for that course. And so obviously you'll find that, as you might expect, electrical and electronic systems is a big focus in this course. And so you'll sort of see that many of the questions are focused on those areas in this particular assessment. Your assessments will vary. So it's just worth keeping an eye on these blueprints to make sure you're hitting the content that the students are going to be assessed upon. And we'll show you, assuming the time allows us to, we'll show you the outcome report where you can see how your students did on each one of these outcomes. All right. So again, the About the Test page is a vital resource, and it really sets the stage for everything that goes on in WebXam. All right, so I am going to be talking about creating additional programs in WebXam. So this is really mainly for administrators. Again, just to set the stage on this, starting last year, we sort of reoriented WebXam to align with the approved programs for your districts based on approved CTE 26 applications. And what that means is that every year at late July, early August, we'll get a list from the Ohio Department of Education Workforce that says, here's all the approved programs. And we will then update WebXam with those applications and then create one program in each program area that the schools are approved to do. So that happens in August. We try to, or early August, and we want that done before the schools start uploading students because the program needs to be there to upload the student. But oftentimes you may have multiple programs in the same program area in your school. And this has been, it's difficult to sort of manage that, right? Because you might create a program and have to split the students between the existing program they have and now this new program. And so I want to walk through how that happens and how you can do that because it can save you a lot of time and heartache. So again, back to WebXam for this live demo, and I'm going to be using this programs link on the side where you can list all of your programs. And I am going to pick, let's look for a manufacturing program. Yeah, we'll say this demo school 26, 28. We'll do this one, an R7 program. So I'll click this plus and take a look at it. And we'll notice that it's currently got 2 teachers and a bunch of tests assigned to it. But you've decided instead of having one program in manufacturing in your school that you're now going to have 2 programs, and you want to sort of understand, hey, how do I split my teachers, my students up between those 2 programs? So the first step is to create the second sort of program that you're going to be moving students and teachers into, and that's done using the copy program feature. And what you're going to do is supply a new program name. Just for the sake of easiness, I'm going to give this a nice name that will show up at the top of the list. New R7 program. And we'll create that. So now you'll have a brand new R7 program that is completely blank. And what you'll want to do is edit that program, and you'll want to make the following changes. You'll want to select whatever tests are going to be on that new in that new program. So initially you're doing manufacturing, robotics, maybe some CIM, and digital electronics. And you're going to select whichever teacher you want in there. So we'll do Crawford. Yeah, we'll do Crawford. We'll do Noel there. And then we'll typically secondary student should be active. And we'll save that change. So I'm just adding the tests and the teachers to this program. And while I'm doing that, I may also want to find the other R7 program that I just made a copy of and remove Noel Crawford from that. Crawford, Noel. And maybe we're not doing a few of these courses anymore because now we're splitting up into 2 programs. So you can also remove tests from the program there. And we'll save those changes. Now you might think you're done. Hey, I've created this new program. I've added some tests. I've added some teachers. I'm ready to go. If only. If only. Because now what you've got is you've got this new program that we just created, but it doesn't have any students in it. And you got this old program that now has every student in it. And so you need to figure out, hey, how do I move those students around? So you're going to do that from typically from secondary student and then list. Right? And so what I recommend doing in a situation like this is finding the first program. Let's say, what was it again? It was this one? Right. And then I want to, whenever I'm working with students in bulk, I want to change the show X entries down to show all entries so I can see every student. And now I want to move a group of those students. We'll say 10 of them. So we'll just put check marks here. We'll check each one. Assuming I can figure out, assuming I can do this correctly. Well, in the interest of not making you watch me check a bunch of boxes, we'll do the first 5 students. And then I'm going to choose under bulk actions what I want to do for those 5 students. And what I want to do is remove them. Well, actually, first I want to add them to the new program. So I will find I think I skipped a step, Brock. So when you add new programs, sometimes you'll need to log out and log back into WebXam in order for that to show up in every screen. So I'm going to just log out. That's the fun part of doing it live. I'm going to go back to secondary student list. I'm going to choose R7. You'll see my new program is there. We'll do this. We'll select, if you don't change this show X entries, leave it 10, and you click this checkbox in the header, it'll select all 10 visible students in this case. So we'll just do that this time so you don't have to watch me fumble around too much. We're going to add them to our new program. Yay! And we're going to apply. And at the top of the screen, you'll get a notification. Hey, 10 users were added to your R7 program. They are still selected. And so then the next thing I want to do is remove them from the old program. And for that, we can just find, oh, I got an inactive guy there. Let me find that. I know watching me scroll, perhaps not the most exciting thing to be doing. So we're going to pretend I selected the right program, and then I would click the apply button to remove them, which I can't do because I didn't select the program, and it will remove them from that program. I don't feel like scrolling all the way through the list. You could trust me. And then you can now refilter your list by that new program, and you'll see those 10 students are now moved from one program to another. So when creating a new program for you administrators out there, copy the program, reset the students or reset the tests and teachers in those programs, and then move the students accordingly. And then you can do your uploads. The upload process, which Brock will talk about, will look at the teacher on the upload, will look at the location in the upload, it will look at the pathway, and it will place those students in the correct program based on that information. So that is the fun and exciting process for copying programs and moving students. Surely there's no questions about that process. Are there any in the room first? No? See, when you can see me do this on the screen, it's all perfectly clear. Brock, are there any questions from our online friends?
I haven't seen any, well, not on this particular yet, but there are some other ones I wanted to cover real quickly. See if I can find them again. There was a question about will the test automatically submit after 40 minutes? So a student that has an accommodation may not have an accommodation that automatically submits the test like an unlimited time. A lot of the accommodations in WebXam are all time-based. So there's the standard time, which they get 1 minute per question. So most of our tests are going to be 40 items. All the post tests are 40 items. Field tests can change a little bit, but they are much longer. Then there's time and a half, double time, and unlimited time with reader is required. That adds the reader accommodation. The accommodations that have a time-based and are unlimited are going to have a timer that's counting down. And once that timer counts down to 0, the system is going to automatically submit that test. So that is when it will submit. And then there was also some additional confusion about the test activation window and how long students have to take the test. When you're scheduling a test, we call it a test activation window. What you're doing is you're scheduling a 1 hour period of time that you expect the students to be with you in class, in school, being proctored. Then you have, so an hour is usually longer than a standard school period. You would schedule it. If you haven't done it before, we do recommend scheduling the tests in advance. We allow you to schedule testing activation windows up to 7 days in advance. When you're scheduling, there is a place you can choose a date and time just above the list of students when you're activating. Once you've activated the students, that means that at that start time, when the students log in, the test link will show up. So you could schedule it 10 minutes before the class or right at the beginning of the class when the kids log in. They will not see that link until they refresh that page or log in during the activation window. Let's say a half an hour goes by and the kid finally goes to start taking the test. When they click that link, their time will be set at that point and they'll have whatever time is allowed them. So if they're a half an hour into a period, they click the button and it's a standard post test, they'll get 40 minutes to complete it. So that's how it works. It is often confusing about what an activation window is versus how much the time the students actually get. And that would be the answer.
Yes, sir. Hang on. Let me get you a microphone so our online friends can hear you. You got them right? That's good because I'm all tied in here apparently.
Didn't even warm up my singing voice. One of the things I think you may have just answered it when you can schedule the activation window ahead of time with the access codes. It used to be you would give the kids their password or their access code ahead of time, and I didn't think we were able to do that now, but we can do that by scheduling the activation window because it'll show us because what we're doing is we're losing a lot of testing time by trying to get the access codes to kids. So that's one of the things we can do. It'll show us the access codes ahead of time for that session, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, thank you.
To expand on that a little bit. So once you do the activation, if you're using the schedule ahead feature, you'd set the date and time. If you don't set anything, it would open the window immediately. So if you schedule ahead, you have up to 7 days. Personally, I recommend until teachers understand what they're doing, going in 3 days ahead of time, scheduling the date and time. Then you check mark every student that you expect to have in that testing session. Don't worry about if they don't show up or whatever, they just won't take the tests and you can reschedule them later. But you mark all the students that you expect to be there. And after you've clicked activate, the page will reload and show you a date and time that you've scheduled that session for. I have many people call and say, hey, I want to undo that. You can do that if you just check mark those kids again or go back through and check mark the kids that have a session, and the button will change to say activate, deactivate, or deactivate, depending on the kid's current status. So you can remove sessions. But once you have active scheduled sessions, testing sessions, you can scroll down to the bottom. There'll be a red button. It will let you choose different options to download a CSV file, 2-column, 3-column PDF versions. I recommend the 3-column PDF. You download that PDF, you'll have all the data you need. And then they're designed that they can be printed out. So if you do this 3 days in advance, you have access to a printer, you print it out, you can cut up little testing tickets that you hand to the students on the day of testing. So you can do all the legwork ahead of time so that there's no stress on the day of testing. You just walk in, give the kids the slips of paper and tell them to go to webexam.org. Yes, less stress, a lot less. I've heard from people that they're a lot happier once they've figured out that process, that they know they can just take care of it and they're not having to worry. Teachers that are still thinking in the old way where we used to give passwords, the passwords were an issue because a lot of those slips of paper that schools were handing out were getting lost and they were access to an account. So with the access codes, we're only generating an access code for the day of testing and it expires at the end of that day. That access code, the password side of it that we call the access code, will be good for any test that's scheduled that day. I generally recommend just downloading the PDF and printing one out for every class so you're very organized and you know that you have everything covered and you can just say this stack of paper is for this class and the other one is for another class. Additionally, some people want to go in. We've always used to show the passwords underneath the secondary students list menu. There's a column there that would have the passwords. There's a button that you'd click that says show passwords. Now it says show access codes. Some teachers know the old way would go there to try and recover the access codes for testing because they want to go do it the old school way, which is more cumbersome and prone to error. Those access codes, though, won't show up ahead of time. It's only the day that they have a scheduled test. So if you go there and try and do that the day before testing, there's not going to be anything there because that access code wouldn't be valid for that day. So you either have to have that PDF document or you can go to the reports menu. If you ever have lost the data that you want, the PDF, you can go to the reports menu, go to the activation report. It will show you all future test activations that you have. You can visually see the list of students, the access code, as well as you get the opportunity to re-download the PDF if you want to print it. So again, I recommend trying to do that a couple of days in advance. If you really get stuck or confused, you can always call us or shoot an email to support. But I feel like once teachers get that understanding of how it operates, it can relieve a lot of stress and it's a lot more organized. We really wanted to switch the access codes because it adds a lot of security to WebExam, but we didn't want to force teachers to do all this in one day. So Richard kindly built the system to allow you to get that data ahead of time, print it out, and be prepared.
Thank you. And Brock will be going through that activation process in a little bit here. One thing I do want to say is I didn't kindly build that. Teachers requested it. Teachers requested it. Teachers said this will be really helpful if I can test my students in advance. I cannot tell you how important teacher and administrator feedback is to how WebExam operates. If something isn't working well for you, don't hesitate to contact us and ask about it. We want to make sure you're not getting frustrated with WebExam or having difficulty, because there's enough in life that's making life difficult for us. Let's not have WebExam be one of those things. We're happy to add new features based on what teachers like yourselves, administrators like yourselves, and schools need. I guess it is a kindness, right? But again, a lot of stuff that you see in WebExam is happening because teachers requested it and administrators requested it. So keep those requests coming.
There is one other question that I wanted to touch on, and unfortunately, this one's a difficult one, Richard. So it's about the graduation requirements.
Yeah.
So the question is, even though the language of the graduation says proficient scores on 3 web exams, it's misleading. If there are 4 web exams for students, the students need to have a cumulative proficient score of the 4 web exams. Are you able to add detail on that?
Yeah, so it's the interpretation that the Office of Career Tech at the Ohio Department of Education uses is that that's a pathway score, basically. So it might be 3 tests, it might be 4 tests. It's the pathway score for that student. Because sometimes you'll have a program that includes 3 courses within a pathway and then 1 course that's outside of that pathway. That will happen occasionally. So that's why there's that 3 test minimum. And then, but most programs, of course, have 4 tests. And so there 3 is the minimum, 4 in a particular pathway is what's sort of typical. And then there may be additional tests students are taking in that program if they're looking to expand their knowledge a little bit beyond maybe what that program is offering. And so maybe they're doing some independent study, or they're taking an additional EMIS course or additional course or whatever. But yeah, so the graduation requirements say 3, but the interpretation of that is it's a pathway score because programs typically must include at least 3 tests in the approved program area. I hope that helps. And I would say if that's still unclear, which it may well be, there may well still be some obscurity there, feel free just to email us, support@webexam.org. Give us a call, 614-292-4988, and we'll be happy to sort of dive into detail and get real particular about it, because it is confusing.
Yeah, I also think about the CTE assessment matrix states that if a student's enrolled in the course, they're required to test. So I kind of look at it from that standpoint. If they're enrolled in the course and you don't test them, that would reflect badly on your participation score for the district. So I recommend, if the kid's enrolled, you're going to want to test them. I don't think that they are encouraging any school district to pick and choose which courses they test a student in, trying to help their grade. So based on the matrix requirement, the CTE assessment matrix stating that they need to test in every course. I would use that as just focusing on making sure that the students take every test and do as well as they can. And that, again, is where school districts monitoring the students' progress through their career is beneficial in making sure that they have opportunities to raise their lower scores. We always take the highest score if a student retakes the test. And the best time to make sure the students are getting those opportunities is when they first start their program. I get calls from districts saying, we have a month to this kid graduates and we want to use WebXam as the method for them to graduate. We can't do much. But if you start early and give them the opportunity to retest retest on a test they didn't do well on over multiple years and work with them to learn that material, they're going to have a higher chance.
All right, so we will move on to the sort of the translation portion of this presentation. I just want to sort of have you see what this process looks like for a student when they're taking a test, if they're going to view a translation. So in this situation, we're going to take a look at the demo test. So if we had activated a test for this student, it would be showing up here. Since the student doesn't have any active tests, we can take this demo test. And the demo test is designed to sort of help familiarize the student with how WebXam looks and feels. But we'll be using it here so you can see how the translation feature looks. And so you'll notice when the student signs in that because there's only 10 questions on this test, they have 10 minutes remaining. They get a warning at 10 minutes and then again at 5 minutes that their sort of time is elapsing for them. And so then they'll typically be going through and answering questions maybe. But they can also click on this gear icon up here. Come on. I'm getting caught on this window. Can I close you, please, sir? No? Thank you, please, thank you. Bye. Okay, you can click on this gear here and you can say, hey, show me a Spanish version of this item. And as I was saying, the student will continue to see the English version, but they will also see a Spanish version. Now, this demo test includes a question like this one, which has no value in translation because it's specific to English. So I'm going to switch to a different item because that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So there typically aren't any questions in the career tech area that are English specific like that. That one test was, one of the question was. Anyway, so. Okay, so this question is, asking about whatever it's asking about, I guess, Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn stuff. So does that? Okay, so you're seeing, again, the student will see the question both in English and in Spanish, and will see each possible answer both in English or in Spanish. Again, those translations aren't very helpful. Let's do a different one. And so again, they'll see those translations so that they can pick. And I mentioned that we show this English version enough because I just want you to know that if there's an image on an item, the text that might be inside an image is not being translated. System ain't quite that good yet. The AI is coming for that. So we want to show the English version so that they can still sort of connect the image to the possible answer that it might be. But the Spanish version is here, and we think that still will be very helpful. And I can tell you, we saw a lot of use of translation feature for pre-tests this fall, and I expect we'll continue to see that. We've already had a number of districts contacting us, suggesting additional languages that would be very helpful. I'm sure Chinese will be one of those. If your district has a lot of students in a particular language and we can support it, we will. We just want to get this year, make sure everything's working smoothly. For Spanish, make sure everything's good and the students are getting what they need. Evaluate that data and then move on next year, adding additional languages. So students will continue to see the translations until they go up to this gear icon and turn that off. And then it will go back to just showing the English version of the test.
Can you show that exit also under the gear icon, just to touch that, the additional emergency exit option?
Yeah, a few other things I'd like to point out here is because a lot of times for teachers and administrators, you don't ever see this screen. You really shouldn't be seeing this screen unless you're coming to WebXam for a teacher review session. So a few other things of note, by the way, are that there's a sort of a navigation here, and for those of you who are in the building, it's kind of getting washed out by the projector a little bit, but there is a 6 and a 7 and an 8 and a 9 there. The students are able to see which questions they've answered and which questions they've not answered. Students can mark items for review, which again, the button's getting washed out, so I'm not able to tell if that's being clicked. And then finally, one thing you should know is under this gear icon, there are some additional options available. Actually, dark mode might be really helpful in this situation. There's a dark mode. That worked out well, didn't it? So there is a dark mode available for students who maybe have some eyesight sensitivity or just prefer it. Here's where they can do that mark for review option. And that is good because then if they move on to another item, that little question will have a little tick mark at the top here that tells them, hey, I've marked that for later review. And so that way they know when they get to the end, oh, I want to go back to this particular question because I want to make sure that I answered correctly, or I want to make sure that I left that for the end. The other option here is sort of an emergency option to exit a test. Similar to closing the browser, if a student needs to leave because of illness, they can choose that gear and choose emergency exit, and it will just automatically log them out of a test. I'll even do that here. It'll just kick them right back to the login screen. So that can be a nice one-click way to get out of a test. And then they can get right back in, right where they were. They will have to reset dark mode if they do that. And for a demo test, they'll be right back, or for a normal test, they'll be right back where they started. For the demo test, it just restarts them.
That is something that's interesting. Sometimes there's people that call saying that a kid got kicked out of the test. If there's ever a network disturbance between our servers and them, they can get kicked out. As long as the students were still in that 1 hour test activation menu, they could log back in and try to get back in. After that period expires, though, you'd have to go through an additional process to reactivate that test. So that while we have emergency situations that you can close a test for, another frequent thing is just where the internet connection at the school drops out and they can't get back in for a period of time. And then you can go back in and reactivate those at another day. That's another kind of emergency situation.
Okay. And the last thing your students tend to do on this page is to submit the test. So submit the test, they'll get a little warning, are you sure you're done? And they can choose submit again, and then they'll get to the scoring screen. Go back home and see if there's any additional tests for them to take. So that says, I guess it's useful to see the student experience. It's not something we tend to show a lot, or teachers and administrators tend to see a lot. That's what your sort of students are seeing. All right, Brock, you're up.
One question before we go. Can someone address how CCP portfolios and IRCs in some programs such as Auto can replace web exam tests?
Yeah, and this is really a question probably best asked of the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce and the program specialist there. But in essence, some web exam assessments can be replaced by a certification. Obviously, in auto tech, that's a big thing where there might be an ACE test that a student is taking, maybe so they can go right out in the career field with that certification and start working. Even in those cases where there is a certification available, and you can see that list of available certifications in the assessment and program matrix on the ODEW website, even if that certification is available, we still recommend giving that student that web exam assessment because it can just be a safety net. If nothing else, it's a safety net for that student to make sure they have every opportunity to graduate and to get any CTAG credit that they need. So certifications are available to replace some web exam tests, but even in those cases, we still encourage you to assess those students.
I would also recommend that those teachers make sure they do review the course outline and teach that material too. It should be complementary. And by making sure that you cover the course outline as well as what you're going to do in the industry credential, you're going to up that chance of passage. This is Brock Hertzfeld. I'm going to carry through student uploads demonstration. Now, some of this I talked about earlier, so I'm probably going to repeat a little bit, but hopefully it's just beneficial to hear it twice. So one of the questions that we had earlier was about a small school district who had a teacher that was managing their own students. And that is one thing that I would like to cover with this. But generally, we recommend school districts that are large enough size have district testing coordinator accounts created. Up to 2 or more, they can have as many as they want. But I find that school districts who manage the testing with multiple district testing coordinators who know how the system operates have a lot more flexibility. And if somebody leaves or if somebody retires, that they have somebody there that's already up to speed and understands how things work. Rostering students can be very critical to making sure that your teachers have an easy time with WebExam. Most of the times when teachers have difficulty testing, it's because their students aren't in the system correctly or they're missing. And if you have a couple of staff members who know how to get the information out of your student information system and loaded it into WebExam correctly, generally when a teacher logs in, they'll see all their kids, they'll go to the test activation menu, they'll walk through that process, and then they can just test with very little difficulty. Now, it's very frustrating for a teacher when they go and they can't find their kids. They don't understand why they're not there. And that generally ends up being a rostering issue. So mostly this is going to be geared towards the district testing coordinators who have been designated the role to manage this. We encourage it be done at a higher, at least I encourage it to be done at a higher level. School districts can choose how they do this. But it's easier, in my opinion, to have a few individuals work on rostering the entire district students than having multiple individuals try and coordinate it. And that's often the issue that a lot of these other individuals don't have good access to the reporting tools needed to get the information out of your student information system into the format that we need and then upload it. So we have some districts who will upload a roster file with 3,000 kids in it. We might have a very small school with a teacher that's doing this who may only have 17 kids they need to deal with. I am going to be encouraging the use of the roster upload template file to get this done, as opposed to using the manual process where you can enter in a student one by one. Both of them work. Both of them are completely valid. The issue why I usually discourage the manual process is that hand entering data leads to mistakes. And if you hand enter in student SSIDs, which is the identifier that we use to identify a student uniquely and report them to the district, having that wrong SSID means that the state is not going to know that you tested that kid. So I just try and encourage a systematic approach and having a couple of key people try and lead this. But if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to us. So behind here on the screen in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see underneath the menu that says secondary student, You click on secondary student, it expands out, and there'll be the list section, which is where a lot of people go to see the list of their kids. But there's additional menu options. One's going to be new, where you can manually enter in a student one at a time. This is the one that if you only have one kid, fair enough, you can use it. Not a big deal, but just make sure that you're trying to have the data entered in accurately. And then below, unfortunately, well, it is actually there. So below that is the upload button. The upload button will take you to a page that looks like this. What you see here is a big blue button that says get the roster upload template and definition, as well as below that is an upload form where you can choose a file to upload and then upload it. We accept Excel files and we accept CSV files. Now, if you're new to all this, if you follow that blue button to get the roster upload template and the definition file, you'll get to a page that looks like this. At the top of the page, again, the buttons are a little bit faded out here in this room because that monitor or that projector is not showing grays very well. But the buttons across the top allow you to link to go out and see the ODE program and assessment matrix, which has all of the data about all of the tests and which pathways they're in. The next button is labeled download the template. You can click that to download an Excel file that we've already created that you can take your data and paste it in there. The file is going to have columns across it. You're going to want to keep everything in that shape and form with the columns in the exact order because we look at what order they're in when you're populating that data. There's a link back to the main page to do the upload form, and there's an additional link to the documentation, which has a lot of information about doing uploads. Down below that is a table of information that gives you a layout of kind of the structure of the data that goes into that Excel file. As an example here, the very first row says SSID. That's the unique identifier that we use to identify the student. It's going to tell you that, yes, it is required. It's going to give you a description of what that data looks like. In this case, it's 2 letters followed by 7 numbers. And then the possible values is just kind of a sample example of what it would look like. I'm sorry, the possible values in this case is actually showing 2 letters and then followed by the 7 numbers. And then the next column is showing the example. And that's for every one of the columns there, so you can go look it up. We have certain questions that we'll get, like there's ones like the accommodation. I know that I have an accommodation for a student. What is the identifier that I'm going to enter in for that particular accommodation? Accommodation is also another interesting topic here because a lot of student information systems, as far as I've heard or seen, do not include the accommodation data in their exports. So you can work with your office that does have the accommodation data and try and get that ahead of time and load it into this file so that you only have to upload one file and have the accommodation set at the same time that you're loading students. Otherwise, a lot of school districts seem to roster their kids and then separately go get their accommodation data and go in and manually edit the kids one by one. That's the way that I've seen it operate. You can choose to do either one. I do recommend, though, remembering that after rostering your students, the kids with accommodations have not had them set unless you did it. And teachers oftentimes, when they're giving a test, may not check to make sure the accommodation is set correctly. So it is something that you want to do to make sure that all those students with accommodations are getting the appropriate options. This is an example on screen now of what the Excel file looks like. So once you've downloaded it and opened it up, you'll see that we have across the top the header rows that can be referenced to what you need to have placed in there. We have 2 example rows of an example student. You can leave those or you can delete it. It doesn't matter. But below that, you'd want to take your student information data that you've pulled out and populate those columns, leaving every one of the columns in that exact order before you upload it. And here's an example of what it would look like after you've added your data in. We have a couple of fields that are no longer used. EMIS ID is not required. You can send in the EMIS ID. We used to use EMIS IDs years ago, but we've now switched to SSIDs, which are guaranteed unique by the state. When a student enrolls in public education in Ohio, they get an SSID, and that's how we're able to track the students uniquely. So that is what we've moved to, but we've left the EMIS column. It is not required. Additionally, there's the additional test column. We used to allow you to add on one individual test or multiple individual tests if a kid was taking something outside their pathway. We don't pay attention to that anymore. Since we've moved to programs and we're more closely tying the exact courses that are part of a program in WebExam, we are not accepting just additional tests outside of the programs that you have assigned. But for the ease of making all the systems still work across the state, we decided to leave the same exact format so that nobody had to change their code that's outside of our system. So once you've created your file and you've gone to the upload menu, you will choose the button to upload, and then we will scan it for errors. So this is an example of a file that was uploaded and has errors. So the rows that are here, you might not be able to see it if you're here in the room, but that is a shade of kind of a pinkish red, indicating that there's errors. What we end up doing is we take your file, you upload it, we scan it and look for any logical errors that we know are incorrect, and we will tell you about it. We can give warnings, informational, and errors. The warnings and information are things that you want to review. We'll have a statement saying what the thing was that we thought was slightly strange, and you can review it. It might be something like the student is found in another location at the state. We're going to tell you that we're going to move them to your location, which makes sense. If you have a kid that moved to your district and you've told us that they're now a student in your district, we're telling you that we're going to move them from some other location and now move them to your school. You might get some informational messages that say, hey, we've noticed that this SSID, the name is different from what you provided previously. And it might be something like, this year it's Billy, but last year it was William. It's something that you might want to look at. Most of the time, those things are totally fair, not a big deal. The name can be whichever version. But if you see hundreds of these errors, it can be an indication that you have something like you've offset a column with the SSIDs and the names wrong. So if you see lots of errors, you might want to investigate. Like if you have an error for almost all of them, it could be an indication that you've got something wrong in your file that you want to investigate before you actually process it. So some of the errors that we have here is like the first name is blank, the last name is blank, location is not valid. That would be your IRN number that identifies your location. No matching program in building with teacher. Now that's an interesting one that we have been getting more frequently. So when you're rostering your students, we're trying to find out if the student already has an account. If so, we're going to update that current account on WebExam with whatever data you've passed to us. So if the name changes, we're going to take that, we're going to update the account. Additionally, we're going to update the grade level, which is a big thing. If you don't tell us that the students change grades, we won't make a change to it. It'll just be stuck on whatever grade it is. So because of that, we encourage school districts to roster every kid that's enrolled in a CTE or FCS course every year. We want updated data to make sure that the data that's in WebExam is accurate. So I'll often hear schools who say, well, we thought we only had to enter the students once. And you'll get an initial account in WebExam, but the data is not going to be accurate. If you're not telling us every year everything that changed, you're going to get things that are out of date, like the grade level. So we do encourage, do a full roster of all of your kids and send us all the data, and we'll make sure it's accurate. Back to the no matching program and building with teacher error. We look at 3 pieces of information in the upload file. It's going to be the IRN, the pathway, and it's going to be the teacher ID. We're going to take those 3 pieces of information and we're going to look for any matches to that teacher that's a member of a program at that location and that pathway. We will then assign those students to that program. If any one of those 3 pieces of information is incorrect or doesn't match on a program, you're going to get that error message that says that there's no program in building with teacher. It's just basically saying we can't find a match, so we can't assign the student to a program. And that may be where you want to go look and make sure the teacher ID is correct. Is that teacher assigned to the program? Are you using the correct IRN? Generally, the pathway is not often the cause of the error, but the IRN and the teacher being assigned to that program frequently can be. And most of the other errors are pretty generic, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. This next image is going to be kind of an example of what it's going to look like when you've uploaded a file without a bunch of errors. So this is the upload page. Again, it was that blue button that takes you off to the details. Then right below that was the choose file. That's where you would choose the file that you're going to upload. You'd then click the upload button. And then down below here is showing a list of data without a bunch of yellow or red colors in the boxes indicating that you have an issue. So once you've solved all your issues, so you upload the file. If you find issues, go back to your original file, make the edits, upload it again. We'll scan it for errors again. And you can repeat that process until you have no errors. While we can submit a file with informational and warnings, we will not submit a file with an error because we know it's a logical error. It doesn't make sense. But once those are resolved, you're then ready to go ahead and upload your file. So this is the same section of that page, but just scroll down a little bit. On the left-hand side, there's a button that says Process Upload. You would click that. Then a blue bar will go across the screen showing that we are processing that file. And once it's 100% complete, all that data is now in WebXam. So you've either created brand new accounts for student SSIDs that we didn't see before, or we've gone in and found an account that already existed and we updated that information. And that is the process in a nutshell. That's the, if you have all of your kids loaded, it's going to make your teachers' lives very easy. Next, I'm going to walk through the test activation. Does anybody have any questions about the upload process?
On that, in the past, I've never uploaded seniors again. I only upload new students that have been arriving. If I were to do that and I had changes, the one I'm asking about is mostly students who did not return for their senior year. I upload a new file. Does it automatically disable students who don't match or aren't there? Or is that still handwork that I have to go back through in the end? And
that is a good question. So WebXam doesn't. So for us, it would be there's enabled, there's disabled, and there's archived, and then unarchived. So enable and disable is a tool that doesn't normally need to be used, where you can just lock a student's account from being able to log in. And this is in the secondary students list menu. You can manipulate using the bulk actions tool, the state of different accounts. Enable, disabled. Enable, they can log in. Disabled, they get a message that says you can't log in. Additionally, there's a bulk action to archive and unarchive. The default state of everyone you're seeing is unarchived. Once you know that a student has left your program, you don't expect them to ever return, or they've graduated and left, that's a good opportunity to archive them. And what archiving does is it hides those students from the teacher's views. It declutters the interface so you don't have a bunch of accounts sitting there that aren't needed. But not uploading a student doesn't archive them. It's a process that needs to be done by the district because we never know. You know, we can't take a negative of that the kid wasn't included in an upload and then assume that they're not at the school. So everybody stays active. But what I do recommend doing is the district testing coordinators or whoever's the main DTC or the administrator, a good opportunity is after graduation to go in and on the secondary students list menu, there are filters. You can filter by grade and you can filter by graduation year. Graduation year is something that we added probably 4 or 5 years ago, but it's a much more accurate tool than the grade level because we had a lot of students that their grades weren't being updated. If a DTC goes in after graduation and filters down to all the students that were supposed to be graduating that year, they can then check mark the very first check mark in the list of students, select them all, and then archive all those kids. I, of course, recommend scanning through and making sure that they all truly did graduate. But that'll clean up a lot of the students that are in there cluttering up. But to get back to your question, we won't do anything if you don't upload a student. If they're gone, we won't know. They will still be active. They will. Yeah. Individual students, but I do recommend if you get comfortable with filtering and then reviewing the results and then using the bulk actions tool to operate on many students at once, That's a good way to speed things up. After graduation, doing it then, or waiting until you start prepping for rostering students in early fall. If you archive then too, it's a good opportunity to clear out those students that have graduated. Additionally, if you accidentally archived anybody and you do a full roster upload, we will detect that the kid that you're telling us is now currently enrolled in a class was archived, and we will unarchive them and bring them back to life. To the point that we've had some school districts who have said, I'm going to archive everybody. I'm going to give you a complete list, and then that's my active students. And that's a way of cleaning up. It's a very aggressive way of doing it. And I would want somebody to make sure that they know what they're doing, but that is a way to handle that. Yeah, if you're confident in your reports, that's a way to do it. And to touch on the reports too, so this data is generally going to come out of your student information system. The reports can work different ways. So there's a couple of big players in the state. There's Progress Book and PowerSchool for student information systems. Progress Book has a part that's often referred to as Dazzle. Dazzle has a report that's labeled Export to WebExam. If you have Dazzle and you go in there and find that, for all of your CTE programs, it will generate a file that you don't have to manipulate. You just go in and say, this pathway is what I want to report on, load that file, and directly go to WebExam and upload it. It's already in the format that we need, very straightforward, very accurate, shouldn't have any errors. For some of the other student information systems, you might have to manipulate the data a little bit more, work on it to get it into the Excel file, and then upload it to us. All right, for test activation. So the big thing with test activations that has changed is going to be I think it's the middle piece here. So when you're in to activate a test, administrators can activate for teachers. That's the one thing I would want to say. If you have, let's say you have a student testing center, which some schools have. They're large enough that they have somebody else that proctors all of their tests. And you send the kids off to that location. They can have an administrator account that can activate a test in another teacher's name. And that's kind of what's showing here is if you're getting a drop-down menu and there's no teacher selected, you're generally going to be an admin activating a test for somebody else. If you're a teacher, this would default to being your name. When you're activating a test, we track who the teacher was that taught the course, because if you're doing pre and post tests, we're going to be able to give you a teacher effectiveness score, which is going to be able to tell you like how many point gain did you have because you gave the pre-test and the post-test. So that's the main piece of why we collect who was the authoritative teacher of the course. So once you've selected that, this one actually just selected a teacher, and I'm going to go one more. This page will show a list of all of the tests that are available during the current window. In this screenshot, it's only showing post tests. In other times of the year, it might show more buttons. So in January, as an example, it would show pre-tests because pre-tests are available in January for spring, winter semesters. So it could show pre-tests, post-tests, practice tests also become available to be given. And all those can be selected. So you're going to select which type of test you're trying to give. And then you'd hit the next button, which is hidden behind the menu there. On the next page, it's going to ask you to select a program. In the past, we used to ask you to select the pathway. But now that we're gearing everything towards using the program structure, it's going to ask you choose the program. The next option is going to let you choose the course that you're going to give. Now, the advantage here is since we've switched to programs and school districts can control what courses are assigned to a program, instead of a teacher being presented with up to 15 different courses that are in a pathway, now they're only going to see the courses that their district added into their program. So if a district is managing their programs, they've been able to narrow it down and make sure that there's less opportunity for teachers to give the wrong tests, which we had in the past where the names are similar and they just chose a name that they thought was the course that they taught, but they actually chose something else. So this is one of the big advantages of moving to programs is that generally the drop-down menu would only show 4 courses instead of say 15. Once you've selected the course, it is then going to load a page And I do apologize, this is a little bit small. Hopefully you can see it. But this page is going to have the test activation of when you want to schedule it for, the list of students that you can choose to schedule. So at about midway on that page is the start time. When you set the start time, that is when you want that test activation window to open up. If the students log in after that time for the next hour, that start time to the end time is going to be an hour. If they log in during that time, they'll see the link to start the test. So again, what I said earlier, kind of recommend doing it a couple of times. Do it maybe 3 days in advance so you have plenty of time to work out any kinks that you have. You'll be able to get the download file printed out and have that ready ahead of time. If you don't enter in a start time, it will start it immediately, which means like I have 5 minutes before class, I'm going to do this. I want it to start right now. Same thing, but you don't get that ease of use of downloading and printing out the PDF. This is very sensitive. Jumped a couple pages. A couple things of note here. If you're ever doing pre-testing and you activate, nothing happens, you might have a menu that says you don't have testing credits available. Pre-tests do require testing credits to be purchased. It is a warning message that will show up at the top, and people sometimes just ignore it because they don't know what it means or whatever, but they can't figure out why they can't activate a test. Your school district needs to purchase pre-testing credits in order to give pre-tests. There is a fee for that. For all post-tests, that is completely covered by ODEW. There is no cost for post-tests. Looking down a little bit further where it lists the students, there's some examples of students with check marks next to their names. Those are the only kids that are going to be activated for this particular test session. Additionally, you'll see a couple of flags next to students' names. This is the last opportunity that a teacher has to check that a student has an accommodation set on their account. We can't undo tests because an accommodation wasn't set correctly. So you want to work with your district to make sure that the students have the correct accommodations on. And this is your one chance to say, you know, I know that Johnny has an accommodation. Does he have a flag? If he doesn't, that accommodation isn't on his account. You want to go back and edit his account before you move further. Once you've checkmarked the students that you plan on having in that testing session, you'll go ahead and click the activate button on this page. It's bottom right-hand corner. The page will reload, and then you'll see it is covered up a little bit in this graphic, but there are dates and times on the far right-hand corner and a kind of do not sign for other students. So the ones with the date and times have a scheduled test session. It's all ready to go. The ones that have a do not sign means that there's just no session activated. You can go back and undo those test sessions that you started by checking again, and the button will change to with an option to deactivate. And you just click it again, the page would reload, and then it would not have the time there again. Just something, if you need it, that is available. Additionally, the other piece that's important down here is after you've activated, you have the time showing. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a red button. That red button has a drop-down menu that will let you choose a CSV file, a 1-column and a 3-column. Oh, 1 column, 2 column, and there's an additional 3 column. Basically just slightly different structures. The PDFs are very handy to just have. They're portable documents, so you can keep them on your computer if you want to help students. If you only have 5 kids, you could help them log in one by one. Or if you have a large class, I recommend the 3-column PDF because you can print out a couple sheets of paper, cut it up, distribute those to the kids. If you have special needs for your printouts, we had one group that called us and said they used those little heat printers that do receipts, and they wanted a 1-column because they would literally just print out a long sheet of paper and cut those up. Also, the CSV version could be used to do something like a mail merge if you're familiar with it. If you wanted to restructure that data into your own style of testing ticket with additional data, you could manipulate the CSV to make that happen. Once you have that document downloaded, find a printer, print it out, or if you have a small class, keep it on your laptop and you could help those students individually log in if needed. So some common issues that we have. Students that can't log in a test, you can double check to make sure that you're having them log in at the right time. So there is the activation report underneath the reports menu, it will show you all current activations and all future activations. It also allows you to re-download a version of the PDF if you've lost that document, if you don't have it available to you. But you might have a situation where you thought you scheduled it for one time and it's not that time. So they are not able to get in and see a test. If they're able to log in, they have the right activation code, but they might not be seeing any tests linked. It's because that's probably not the window of time that they had. If it was because you tried to do this after the window expired, you could just go back in and reactivate the test again and schedule a new session. If they're getting an error message saying that they can't log in, I don't want to say it's 100%, but I will say 99% of the time when I've been told that they have the right access code and they just can't make it work. If it's the right time, it's usually just something is being typed wrong, even though people are very confident that they've done it. I've had them like throw away whatever document that you have that you're using that you wrote it down on, go back to the original source and redo it, or you type it in for the student. There's usually just something that's not being typed in correctly. So that's my troubleshooting steps. And then if you have additional errors and you can't make it work, call us, we'll help out. So if a student account is not showing, so if you're trying to activate a test and you're seeing that list of students that you want to activate and you're having trouble finding the kids that you want to activate, there is the disabled or archived options that I talked about earlier. Those would keep those students from showing up in the menu. So you can look at the secondary students list menu, look for that kid there, and see if it's archived. If it's not showing up at all, there's a button that says Show Archived. You'd have to trigger that to then be able to see if the student's showing then. If they're only disabled, it would be there's a red or a green button to the right of the name that says Disabled or Enabled. And if they're disabled, you can just go ahead and check mark them, use the bulk actions menu to flip them to being enabled. The next very common thing is, are the students rostered? Did your district roster the kids that you're trying to test? We will sometimes get that where the teachers just assume that WebXam is getting their data from some magical place like the state or something like that. And in reality, it is the school district has to provide us with everything that we have. We don't know anything about the students until the district has rostered that data to us. So you might need to, what I would recommend doing in this situation is going back to the secondary students list menu, search for a couple of your kids, and then check to see if they're archived. If you're not seeing any of them, it's very likely that you just don't have your kids rostered and you need to talk to your local WebXam administrator. Check programs assigned to teachers, course, and students program. So this would be a situation where you could have a kid who isn't assigned to the correct program. We used to assign students directly to teachers when they were rostered. What we do now is that we are determining what program they're a member of. The teachers are a member of that program. Any teacher that's a member of a program can see all kids that are members of the program. So everything goes through that program link. If you have 3 teachers that are part of a program, those 3 teachers are going to see every kid that's part of the program. We don't really think of programs as being just the teacher and the kids that they teach. We think of it as a group of teachers who are trying to get students through a series of courses and improve their grades so that they're proficient at the end. So for that one, again, if you don't, you can search for the individual students underneath secondary students list again and click the green plus icon next to a student and you can see all of their previous tests. You can see what programs they're assigned to and you can verify that information by looking directly at the account. Another thing that can happen is we'll have people call and say this kid's not showing up as being eligible for a test. And I'll go look at the individual student's account and find out that they tested them 5 days ahead of time. They've already been tested and the 30-day window hasn't expired. So they will not show up in the list to be reactivated for a test until the 30-day window has expired. Are there any questions anyone can think of that they related to this?
Okay, this is working now. Hi, Brock.
Hello.
There's a few questions from the chat for you. The first one would be, what's the best approach with a student who is going to another school within the district with regard to activating or archiving that student?
Within the district, oftentimes the account can just doesn't need to be archived. Oftentimes, it's a tough one because it really depends on how the district is set up. If the new location rosters the kid, though, at the new location, if they provide the data, like I'm recommending they do every year, the system will take the IRN location ID that was in the roster upload, and we will take care of the rest to get them assigned to the new program at the other location. I don't recommend going in and trying to manually edit things like the location and think that you've solved it, because the issue is we're really going to need to get that student assigned to the new program that they're going to be enrolled in, which is often going to have maybe a different IRN teacher and maybe even different pathway. So a full rostering whenever the kid is moving is what I recommend doing. That should get them in the right place. And that would require the new school doing it. If they're leaving one school and that they archived it, the new school rostering would find that account, move it out of archiving, and get it to the right location.
Thank you. And then the other one that's in here with regard to activations and uploading is you had mentioned Dazzle. There's a question here about, is there any other option like Infinite Campus to work with WebXam for reporting?
The only one that I'm familiar with has been Dazzle, which I believe Dazzle was a product that may have been bought by Progress Book, and the naming's a little bit weird. So for us, we don't know anything about the student information systems other than what people have told me. And we do know that Dazzle has longstanding had this export to WebXam feature. It's only for selecting CTE programs, and it generates the file exactly as we would need. So I will often ask schools if they're using Dazzle, because, hey, there's this great feature you might not know about that will let you get that data pretty quickly. But everyone else that I've talked to has been able to get the data they need. They might need to write a custom query in the tool that they have. We just don't have any insight into how they operate. We don't have access to it. We can't give any advice. But when I've spoken with people, they, oh yeah, I'm really good at the reporting. I know where to go, and I'll go get it, and then they'll fetch the right data and just have to get it into the right format into the Excel file. So it's a little bit more work, but it seems like it's very doable for most power users.
There's a few other ones, but they're probably good for a general round of Q&A at the end.
And I think we're going to go back to Richard for reporting.
You thought you had gotten rid of me, but now I'm back. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on reporting before we move on to the blueprints and an additional way to help figure out what the most important items that we need to write are. So reporting obviously is a key aspect of what we're doing here. So we'll just move right in. We'll just start talking about it. It's, So I always recommend when getting started with reporting to start with the summary report. Just starting with the summary report makes everything easier. And so I am going to do that. So let's just go to last year, for example, and run this summary report. So you are going to see every test given by every teacher in your sort of district or domain, whatever it may be, across in this case, the entire CTPD of our demo location. So you're going to see what test and what teacher and how that test is going to get reported. And so one thing for district testing coordinators and administrators to pay attention to is that reporting location. Because what that's telling you is, hey, these results, these 21 students who took this AFNR test, their reporting is going to go to district demo 17 district. So if that's wrong, because actually it should go to the career center, that's something that will need to get corrected. Otherwise they might not get an EMIS correctly, which might affect some things. So I always recommend as a DTC or an administrator to make sure that reporting location is correct. This past year, because of the program change, we saw a lot fewer issues with students getting reported to the wrong location. We think using this program data really simplified that process quite a bit, and we're happy about that. But it's still worth keeping an eye on for those of you who are administrators. But what I really want to focus on is that this number of students column is a link. And what that will do then is run that testing report for this teacher for that test. So you just click that 21 there, and it will run that test or run that report, and you'll immediately see, aha, here are my students. And in theory, hopefully, it'll be 21 entries. Yay! Sometimes things work. Anyway, so you'll see when you run a testing report, you'll see the student's name, you'll see the performance standard that applied for that test, you'll see when the student took that test, you'll see the percent score, and you'll see what that sort of end rating is, if that way they were proficient on that test or otherwise. You could then use the green plus next to each student, and you'll see every test that that student has taken. And then you'll also see any pathway scores, and those pathways represent any programs that that student is in. So this student is in an ag pathway and an engineering program, or an ag program and an engineering program. And so you're seeing how that student is doing based on however many tests that that student has taken in that pathway. And when you look up at their full results, you sort of see, okay, the AFNR test is the one that's being used for ag. The machine tools test is the one that's getting used for that engineering score. So typically, wherever you see that green plus next to a student name, that's what it's going to show you, except for the outcome report, which we'll get to in a second. You can download this file into Excel or to a CSV or a PDF. I won't show that. There are some additional details that can be useful for administrators where we then include the teacher name and the location. Again, that's if you're downloading for a whole district or whatever, and you want to get everything at once. Because at any point you can choose to edit these options so that you can sort of filter down to particular students or go a little bit wider in your searches. One thing that you may not know about for administrators and for FCS in particular is that you can, EOC, you can choose to do a report on, come on, Huggins, EOC. You can choose to sort of, hey, give me a report for this teacher for every test that they may have given, and run that. It'll chug away for a second here because now it's going through and finding all of them. And now here's every test that that teacher gave last year and every result. And so that can be useful instead of having to run 20 different reports, just do one report. But I still always recommend starting with that summary report and clicking on that number of students to get started, because then there's no ambiguity about what you're doing. Let us move on to the outcome report. Do I have a favorite county? We'll use Vinton County. We'll use Vinton County. So yeah, just on this demo site, the teacher names and student names are all, like last names are always a county. Just in case you were wondering what I was saying there. We're going to choose a different test, and we're going to do this for last year. And we'll run that report. So this outcome report is meant to work with the blueprint So you can see how students did on individual on questions broken down by outcome. And so when you initially run this report, what you're going to see is how all of your students did on each pathway that's covered on that test. And if you've given both a pre-test and a post-test, you'll see both of those scores together. So you'll see, say, in this business outcome that the students, they didn't have the information necessary, so they only 18% of them got questions related to that outcome correct on the pre-test. And then on the post-test, 72% of those questions were answered correctly. So the students really benefited from some instruction in business ethics and law. So mission accomplished. Now, unfortunately, because this is an ag test, you're not seeing the blueprints. You'll have to use some other data to get that. And that's just because we only show a blueprint count on the outcome report if it's the current blueprint. But regardless, this last column will typically be, say a student took a test this year, it'll typically be, you'll see what percentage of the items are in the blueprint for that outcome as well. So again, you'll continue to see, oh, look, I've got this outcome where my students did better. Maybe there's an outcome, I don't see one here, where the students didn't improve as much. And so that might be a way for a particular student to improve their score by giving them additional instruction in that area. Or if your entire class needs to improve there, maybe you need to find a different lesson plan or a different lesson to use. So again, I mentioned that all of this is showing for your entire group of students that tested. At any time, you can click this Show Student Details button, and you'll see for each student how they did on each outcome on each test. So that's a lot of information to see. Again, this green plus is going to show you for that particular student all of their testing records. But what you'll want to note here is, okay, so Nicole Adams, oh, look, recognizing diseases and disorders, they got a 0 here. So if I needed to retest that student, I may want to focus my remediation on recognizing diseases and disorders. That's just an example. So the outcome report can be really handy combined with retakes. Last thing I want to cover just real quickly is the pathway report, because the pathways have come up a little bit. Here earlier we had a question. This was the sort of little warning dialog box that we were talking about earlier that says, if there's ever a situation where WebXam and AMOS have different things, AMOS wins. We work very hard to stay in sync with AMOS, and they have been very helpful for us in terms of making sure that there are no discrepancies, but inevitably things happen. So just be aware that they can differ from us, and if they do, they win. So let's say that same teacher, Vinton, and we'll do the ag pathway, A0, and we'll do last year. Okay, and we'll say tests required. We'll do 3 tests, and we'll run that report. This may take a few seconds to run. One thing I'm not going to cover today, so please, if you have questions about it, give us a call, is CTAG reporting and Ascents and how all that works. If our questions, we'll have a question period later, we can get into that. Just know that that is available. While this is running, I'll also mention, I talked a little bit about this earlier, that there are 2 subject codes that have additional requirements beyond the WebXam assessment. And those 2 are baking and pastry arts, 330125, it has that performance assessment piece with the recipes, checklists, and all that. Also, education portfolio, 350010. There's a rubric that students complete. Well, students complete a portfolio of the things they've learned throughout the entire year. And then that rubric gets, or that portfolio gets assessed against the rubric by assessors, and that is required. So just be aware that two assessments, two subject codes have a few requirements beyond just the run report. I thought I had stalled enough there, but I did not succeed. While that's running, I'll mention this report identifier. You can choose to have the report include either the name or the SSID, not both. I've got, thank you, sir. I've got results, yay! Just so you are aware, one of the key things working on this year is to speed up these reports a little bit for you, I promise. We're working on it. What you'll see for each student, and Nicole Adams we recognize from the outcome report, is that you'll see that the student has the first name, the last name. This top row is what we call pathway row. Now, because I chose as the filter, hey, a test required in this program is 3, and the student has only taken 2 tests. We can see that here. That's why that says this score is incomplete. If we had chosen 2 initially, then that score would say proficient. But you still can see how they're doing so far. And then you'll see each test the student has taken in that pathway. And then this check mark indicates that, oh, look, I even have a nice little thing there. That test score is being used as part of that student's pathway score. And so if we click the green plus, again, we'll see all of the students testing. We'll see they've taken these 2 post-tests and this 1 pre-test. And we can see now the same information. Students taking 2 tests and they're proficient. If the student had retaken a test, you'll see those retakes as well, and you'll just know because you'll know which one's being used based on that checkbox. One last thing is this show pathway rows only option. So that'll show you 1 row per student, which can be helpful, obviously. It'll show you how many tests they've taken in the pathway, whether or not their score is proficient so far, and whether or not their score is proficient, generally speaking, is kind of off the screen there. And again, you can click on the Excel option to download that at any time. So I kind of covered that stuff quickly. We'll sort of do a general Q&A after the last piece of this, so we'll hold off on questions until then. In the meantime, we'll talk about another way to get involved in writing these assessments. Absolutely. So there's 2 courses. There is baking and repeat the question. Oh, thank you. Oh, she's in the mic. So repeat the 2 subject codes that have additional requirements beyond the WebXam assessment. Did I get it? Woo!
That is correct.
I nailed it. Those 2 are, first off, 330125, which is baking and pastry arts. And that's a performance assessment. That needs to be, the process needs to be assessed by 2 assessors that are there on the day the students are actually doing the baking of, I think it's eclairs.
They make eclairs. If you're there at school, you should be there.
Right. Yeah, got it. Yeah. I mean, I guess a taste test is the most important part of this process in that situation. Education portfolio, which is the other one, 350010. That you don't want to be eating the portfolios.
Yeah. Not delicious.
No, not well, high fiber, right? And those are assessed sort of after the fact, right? So the student passes in the assessment, the assessors will be sort of assigned the portfolios to look at. Do we have any education portfolio people in the room? No. They then sort of complete a rubric, which is available on the ODE website. And then that rubric then the rubric is used to calculate part of the final score. So 330-125, 350-010. Mr. Sean.
All right. So we just want to talk very briefly about test blueprints. Probably one of the biggest questions we get from teachers is how we decide what goes on the test. And the simple answer is we don't. In order to know what is important, we seek input from other people. And so we have a couple sources of input to know what goes on the test. One of those is the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. For each course, they have identified certain competencies as must-haves that absolutely are core to the content of that course. And that decision usually comes from talking to instructors, business and industry panels, et cetera. On CTAG courses, the Ohio Department of Higher Education also indicates a certain number of must-have competencies. Usually those are the ones that the students need to know in order to get college credit. That usually accounts for a third to half of the test content, and then the rest comes from a blueprint survey. And so the blueprint specifically is a document that we use to know how to build the test. It is at the outcome level. Richard showed how you can find it if you just search for about the tests, or if you're running an outcome report in WebXam, you'll see the blueprint percentage there in the far right column. That got rave reviews from ODEW and the ag folks that I showed it to the other day, by the way. The blueprint shows basically the percentage of the test that, or the percentage of the item bank that covers each of those outcomes. And so if there's an outcome, for example, that is maybe 1%, it probably means that for that course, it's not really essential content. It's good to cover, but it's not the meat of the course. And so you'll see that a lot with some of the strand 1 items, for example. Those outcomes tend to be relatively low. Higher percentages are usually the core content. Those tend to be those strands that are really in the subject area. And so those are the ones that are going to have the most items. The larger the percentage, of course, the more items, probably the greater the classroom focus. So that is what the blueprint is. And I mentioned that we get information from ODE and ODHE, and then we also have a blueprint survey that we use to determine what information should be covered, and that comes from instructors who teach the course. If you have any questions about the survey, you can reach out to Dr. Bridget McHugh. She's our assessment program director. Her email address, mchugh.159@osu.edu, is there on the screen. We prefer when people are filling out the blueprint survey that we know who they are. And so it's usually not something that we like to have just an open link so that people aren't filling it out multiple times, but instead we can kind of track it a little bit. So the easiest way to get on the list for the blueprint survey, or again, if you have any questions, is to send Bridget an email. Why you should take the blueprint survey: if you are an instructor in arts and communication or in information technology, we really want your input. We need to know what the important content is for each of the courses. And so that is what we use to determine. There are some courses, for example, that are relatively introductory, where the focus on strand 1 skills is a significant part of the course. There are other courses that might be a higher level that students are taking, during their last year or semester, that the strand 1 items are really not the focus. We don't know how to place that focus without instructors telling us. And so that is the purpose of the survey. And it's one of the easiest ways to impact the content that goes on the test, to make sure that the test matches what's happening in the classroom. So even if you have instructors who can't participate in item writing because of busy schedules or availability, they can complete the blueprint survey if they're in that career field. And of course, each year the blueprint survey changes depending on the career field we'll be writing for item writing the following year. So the survey is currently live. As I mentioned, you can send an email to Bridget McHugh to get on the list if you would like to participate in that survey. Again, reach out to her if you have any questions about it. If you aren't sure if you filled it out, she might be able to determine that as well. And then the survey, we have two members of our psychometric team, Bridget and Dr. Becky Barenbaum, who is our associate psychometrician. They're both responsible for using the data from the survey to create that test blueprint. And again, they combine the survey data with the information from ODEW and ODHE. And that is that. So again, if you have an opportunity to take that blueprint survey, definitely do it. It's a great way to share input about what should be on the test. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Richard. He'll cover the highlights.
We lost Sean in that process. He's all tangled up in these cords back here. We may need some help. For those of you who are not in the room with us, it's about what, 36 degrees in here? We can see each other's breath now. So if I start to move around a little bit, I do apologize while covering these highlights. We just want to have the wrong slide. We just want to remind you that agriculture and environmental systems is in field testing this year, not business, finance, and marketing. That was last year. Ag and environmental systems. So if you have ag courses at your school, if you're an ag teacher, again, the field testing window closes on the 18th of April. I'm just gonna, that's a, field testing closes on the 18th of April. Form finalization by Cinco de Mayo. And then your students in those field tests will be able to retake them if they're seniors and if they need to for graduation or CTAG purposes. One thing that's mentioned on the ODEW website related to that is there is no 30-day window for retaking those field tests. So you can test those students on the 18th, for example. Maybe give yourself a day's grace there, test them on the 17th, and then retest them again once the forms are finalized. You don't have to wait 30 days in that one situation. But otherwise, if you're retesting students, which is the other thing to keep an eye on, retesting within the same year requires 30 days of remediation time, and that's calendar days. It's not business days or school days or anything like that. That's calendar days. And it's not based on the time in a particular day. If you tested a student at 3 p.m., then after 30 days, you'll be able to test them at 8 a.m. Like we're not watching the time in that way. A couple other things to note, we'll be posting this recording once we sort of clean up all the ums and ahs to YouTube. And be sure to, again, to keep an eye on that WebXam calendar to make sure you have your dates correct. And if you can, encourage your IT and arts teachers, or if you are an IT or arts teacher, to participate in the item writing process. I can think of no better way for a teacher to make sure that the test covers what you think your students need to know than to participate in that item writing process. And again, Sean's a great lead facilitator. Angie Stansel, who's been answering questions in the chat, is our recruiter, and she's also one of our best actual facilitators of the small groups that write the items. So it's an essential part of this process, and your teacher's participation in it is not to use the word overly, it is essential. All right, so you'll see contact information on the screen, but if there are any questions, I am happy to answer those. Those of you who are in the room, if you want to find a heater and warm up, or go, yeah, try to cool down or warm up, whatever it is, a little bit, please feel free to do so. I totally understand. That's a great question. So I'll just rephrase, I'll re-answer that question. So for field testing, let's go over that retake policy one more time. So if a student can take the field test, if they have taken the field test, and they can retake it one time after the 5th of May in this case, and that only seniors can do that, or graduating students can do that, and only if necessary for graduation or CTAG purposes. So there's a few rules there.
So there was a question with regard to the outcome report. One of our guests on the chat tried to look up a specific teacher who had left in the previous year, but they were no longer listed. Should their name and their data still be included in the outcome report?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I suspect that teacher has been archived. And so their account has been archived, and so we're not going to show them in the list of teachers available. So you can unarchive that teacher's account if necessary in order to be able to view them in the outcome report. But I think I'll probably take a look at that since you mentioned it. It's a great point that archived teachers, maybe they should be showing up in that list if they've tested recently. So I will check that out. But in the meantime, maybe just unarchive that teacher's account.
There's another one in here for the ag pathway and the ag business credential that requires to be passing for web exams, including the ag business test that's due May 1st, apparently. Will the test score be back in time with the field testing to complete this application?
Well, I hope so. But the answer to that has always been yes. I suppose there's always some risk of some kind, but that's what that form finalization date is, that we want to have those final scores available to you on the 5th of May. And so that's the target that we're aiming for. That's the target that we've always hit. So that's the reality. But there's always a chance that something could happen, but the 5th of May is the day that we're aiming for.
Could you address how CCP portfolios and IRCs in some programs like Auto can replace the web exam tests?
I'd probably check with your program specialist at the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce to be certain about that. It's not an area of expertise for me. Again, I would recommend checking on the program and assessment matrix as well, because that will list for you, and that's on the ODEW website, that will list for you which web exam assessments can be replaced by which certifications. And then again, I would say if you have questions about that, I would certainly contact the ODEW program specialist. I think in transportation, for example, that's Fritz Reiser would be the person to contact. So
the individual who asked about the teacher in the outcome report is asking how to unarchive that. Never mind, they found it.
okay. It's not too bad. And again, if there's any questions about that or anything else, support@webexam.org. See that smooth transition there? Support@webexam.org, or give us a call at 614-292-4988. We'd be great to hear from you. If you want to have any questions for our fine recruiting staff, seat-recruiting@osu.edu if you're interested in arts or IT. And if you have a larger question about the entire process, maybe some of the psychometrics and blueprints, Dr. Bridget McHugh, mchugh.159@osu.edu is a great source of information.
If you do call, leave a message. If
Please leave a
yeah,
message.
if you don't get someone, leave a message. Otherwise, it's really hard to get you back an answer.
Yeah. So with that, I am going to mute, and I will thank all of you who came here today for stopping by. It's great to see you again. It's great to do this hybrid again. Everyone online, thank you for attending. And I would say for those of you here, if you need a certificate or anything like that, let me know. For all of you online, again, maybe send us a support ticket if you need a certificate or anything like that. And thank you.